chair, I'd like to welcome you to Homeless and Addicted in Seattle, What's the End Game? I'd like to acknowledge those who've made this forum possible, the University of Washington College Republicans, and all of the Seattle legislative districts. About a year ago, one of those, the 36 legislative district Republicans, held an open discussion on homelessness in Magnolia. The success of that event led to us to create this forum, with a focus on discovering solutions for the whole city. The King County Republican Party is excited to support this nonpartisan and frank discussions of these issues. We seek solutions within the context of compassion and hope. For that reason, we have panelists from many different backgrounds and expertise. We would want all of you in the audience to leave tonight with a sense of direction. Solutions that will empower you as individuals to help create the change needed to save our communities. It's now my privilege to introduce tonight's moderator, John Curley. John is an Emmy and Edward R. Murrow award-winning broadcaster known from Cairo Radio's The Tom and Curley Show, and a former host of King TV's Evening Magazine. Please join me in welcoming John Curley.
Hey everybody, is something on that can hear me? Hello, Ed. Here's the way we're going to do this. We've got a panel, and they're now making their way out right now. Nice round of applause for everybody that is giving up their Tuesday evening to be here with you. Our panel still come out. Now, there we go. Good to hear you yourself. You know where I'm at already. Round of applause. We have 120 minutes. We're going to do 45 minutes for the first panel, 45 for the second panel, and since you're all here, we assume you have something you'd like to say. So we have allocated 2 minutes for the entire question. No, I'm kidding. We have 30 minutes, but if you ask a good question, it might go on a little longer. The average TED Talk is 140 words per minute. So I did some quick math, because I went to Catholic school, and we have 120 minutes at 145 words per minute. We should hear tonight 17,400 words. Hopefully some of them are original and inspiring and end with a feeling that we have some hope. So here's what's going to happen. I'm looking at the panelists and talking to them earlier. We don't have a huge turnout from what we consider to be the left. Everybody agree with me on that? So at times I will play the part of Al Pacino without yelling, and I will do the devil's advocate position and speak from my experience of working with the homeless, both at Fair Start and then also at Union Gospel Mission. So at times I will challenge some of your points of view. It is outside my sort of political lane I'm normally in with the Tom and Curley Show, but I think at times you guys, you don't want to get into an echo chamber because that would be like HTTH. Okay, ready to get started? So each one of you gets an opportunity to lean into that microphone. It's not only an intelligence test, it's an audio test as well. You're going to say your name, and I'm going to ask you, and you tell me who you're representing, and then also I'm going to ask you a very brief question. Are you ready? We'll start right here, closest to me to the left.
David Preston, I'm representing Save Seattle.
Thank you, David. Talk into that microphone so everybody can hear you.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, you can. David's showing you both intelligence and audio. David Preston, here's your question real quick. I'm going to give you 20 seconds. You ready?
Ready.
Homelessness in King County is?
Fixable with a change of politicians.
Thank you. Jason Lance, I know you.
Yeah. Well, you know, the protesters, they gave me a bio. I am a fear-mongering reactionary who regularly writes for the Daily Wire, led by the incomparable Ben Shapiro, the only other conservative Jew that they know. So the comparing
Homelessness in King County is?
It's a complex problem that we can actually address if we throw away ideology on all sides.
Terry Gospel, Seattle's Union Gospel Mission.
Homelessness is? Homelessness is not primarily a resource issue, it's a relationship issue. And if we continue just to throw money at the issue, it's just going to exacerbate the problem, and we're just going to continue to see the numbers rise year over year over year.
Susie Burke from Friendly Fremont. Homelessness is a very big problem for our neighborhoods and the people who want to live in Seattle, so they want to help.
Okay.
Bruno Gelpsis, representing, I would like to say, veterans and those who've been in families who had to recover from opioid and also other forms of abuse. And I'll go ahead and answer the question.
Sure.
Yeah, so, homeless, what is it? In my opinion, it is a symptom of what we are seeing across the country for the human condition. I don't believe you need to be living in a tent to be homeless. I think we have working homeless. I also believe we have those who are functioning homeless. 1/3 of the kids on this campus across the country, also in universities, have some type of mental illness. To me, they're homeless. So I think we should be able to solve the problem for those who are working and functioning as well as those that are living on the street. Thank you.
Thank you. There's a great book called Anatomy of Peace, and it basically the book tells you that if you have somebody that you directly oppose, you should find the thing that you both have in common. So I'm going to ask all of you the same question. If anybody wants to answer, can answer. So coming to this problem from a place of caring. I assume everybody here cares. If we didn't care, we wouldn't be here. If you're coming here because you're angry, you got to put the anger aside, because anger is temporary. It's not a good motivator to get it inside. So here's the question: what? And anybody can jump in. What was the last interaction you had? I don't know, it was a one-on-one personal relationship with a homeless person? And I'll ask Community Gospel Mission to step back a little bit on this, because that's what you do every single day. But last time you came in contact with a homeless person, and what it did to you?
I took some stuff up to Mary's place and had a nice conversation with the gal that was luckily had found Mary's place, and we talked about what her journey had to be going forward. It was positive.
And what motivated you to go?
Well, I take stuff to Mary's place quite often, and my thought there is it's women helping women, and they are very good at doing it.
Okay. Anybody else have an interaction with a homeless person in the last year, 2 years, month, week?
I do. I live in Snoqualmie near North End. I do work with the Catholic Church as a volunteer, and we have one individual who needs help. And in terms of the interaction, this person came to us for help. We realized, for instance, within the Catholic Church and the Knights of Columbus, his problem was too big for us. There was only so much that we could do, and so we had to get him into the system, get support network, kicking up for him. At the same time, we also experienced every opportunity we provided wasn't good enough. There was always maybe a reason why he couldn't take on that accountability, and I think that's a part of the challenge as well. Maybe we'll hear some answers to that today, but letting folks know, we'll give you help, we'll give you assistance, you also have to step up to the program as well. So that's an experience that I and others have faced in the Snoqualmie Valley area.
Yeah. David, I saw you get the microphone right.
Yeah, the last interaction.
Say Seattle's a hate group! David Preston, you're a liar! And you're a hack! And you know it! You spend your days dehumanizing people
right.
so you can sit for vigilante followers on them! You don't care about solutions! You want conspiracies!
Okay.
You want people! How broken the system is!
Here we go.
The system that you love! And you stand up and support every single day! You want to take the war on drugs!
wanted $700 extra to be
Bruno, good to see ya.
Just so everybody knows, we asked the University of Washington security to be here. They wanted an additional $750 of your tax dollars. We told them that this would happen, and now here they come. So eventually, we'll have to have an opportunity to have a free exchange of ideas. Because I know both liberals and Democrats, the Republicans and conservatives love the idea of free exchange of ideas. So we're going to have a free exchange of ideas in an orderly manner, in which we respect one another so that we can hear what someone has to say, and then we can interpret what they say and respond in a civil and responsible manner. This is a problem. You are your own problem. You are your own problem. No one takes you seriously. No one takes you seriously because this is what we do.
If you ever wonder why you're losing, if you ever wonder why all these Catholic candidates you support are in jeopardy now, it's because they encourage bad behavior like this. The people of Seattle, I'm talking about the moderate section of Seattle, want an end to this disruption. They want to hear people talking about solutions. They do not want to see people shout down circumstances yours. Your time is over. Get out.
That cut in.
Everybody is family for one reason.
We get to add that time on to the time limit.
Anybody else want to jump up with long hair and a beard and yell at anybody else? It's a shame because I'm sure they come from a position and they're obviously very passionate about it, but just play by the rules that everybody else has. Why don't the rules apply to you?
Yeah.
So everybody's going to get a chance to talk. If you want to have an uncivil society where people scream other people down, there's no progress in that.
Yeah, but John, if you want to know why we have the problems that we have in Seattle, that's a huge part of it. There is something that because you're not happy with your limit politically or maybe on a appropriate basis that you get to assign this nefarious intent to the other individual. I was out there earlier, I was talking to some of the protesters, they say they want to talk, they want conversations, but I don't think they actually want conversations. There's probably a lot of stuff that we're going to agree with. There's going to be some stuff that we disagree with, and that's okay. And so kudos to anyone who's here who actually disagrees with anyone on this panel who wants to have a respectful conversation. So thank you for that. Kudos.
Good. They threw every name in the book at you, David. Congratulations on that one. You started to answer the question about the last time you had any interaction with a homeless person that moved you or somehow inspired you or left you with a feeling that you hadn't previously had.
Well, John, I talk with a lot of homeless people. I know a lot of homeless people personally. I've helped a lot of homeless people get back into homes over the years, and that's how I got started in this effort that I'm doing with Save Seattle. It's because I got a good look at what works and what doesn't work. And one of the things that doesn't work are homeless camps, specifically sanctioned homeless camps that the city pays a lot of taxpayer money for. So it's interesting that the last homeless person I spoke with was actually an exile from one of these sanctioned camps. I call them shack villages. This is a person who was at the Lake Union village, shack village, and he was expecting to get some help to move into permanent housing there. He got absolutely none. He was seen by no social workers. He was given no incentive to move out, and he was surrounded by drug addicts. And as a recovering addict himself, he did not need that environment at all. And so he ended up having to leave that camp because he did not feel safe. And so he and I have been speaking about his experience there. And unfortunately now, he's living in the woods. He's still endangered in my opinion, but he tells me that he feels safer living in the woods than he felt living at that shack village. So what does that tell you?
Does anybody here see any city in the United States dealing with this homeless issue in a way that you think we could implement here in Seattle?
I think there's certain programs that are working around the country. I think if you look at Salt Lake City and a housing first model, I don't agree with absolutely everything, but I think that there's some data to suggest that housing first can work in certain situations. I like the idea in Albuquerque where you're basically giving jobs to folks who are homeless, and there's something about, and yeah, Terry can talk to this, there's something about someone who has a job, gets a paycheck, feels a part of the community, and then all of a sudden it really builds them up. Now that's not going to work for everybody. It's not going to work for people who are living with mental health issues that are not being addressed, but I think there's a lot that actually does work. I disagree slightly on the tiny home villages. I think that some folks clearly don't have a good experience there, but also a lot of people have had it. And I actually live next to one. I live a block and a half away from one, and I've talked to some folks who are there, and I've seen some folks who went through that encampment experience and then actually found transitional housing. Is it perfect? No. If you're looking for a perfect solution, you're not going to find it, but you're certainly going to be able to find a lot of potentially good ones that when you put them all together, it actually works. And I'm a huge fan of what UGM does.
Former director of Union Gospel Mission, Jeff Lilly, used to say, we're going to win this because
We outnumber them.
talk into the microphone and finish that again. We win this because
We outnumber them. And basically, one of the approaches that we take is we believe that there are more citizens out there, and even sitting in this audience, that can participate in what it means to move somebody forward from being homeless. We see it every single day. Just to speak real quickly about, obviously, my last experience dealing with somebody who's dealing with homelessness is on a daily occurrence, and oftentimes multiple people. But let me tell you this, last week I was with 70 guys. We took out to Eastern Washington, a dozen of which were homeless on the streets just the week prior. We bring them out there because they're making a decision. They take a personal, at some point they say, this life is no longer tenable for me, there has to be something more. And they made the decision to lock arms together and to start walking out recovery. I think until we get to a point where we're able to name that addiction is one of the largest issues that our country is facing and contributing to homelessness, then we have no answer to actually solving this in any substantive kind of way.
Susie Burke, you told me before we started that you can have a small piece of paper in your hand that you can show when the police come to arrest you. What is on that piece of paper?
We've experienced the problem of having someone in the community who breaks windows and does a lot of threatening things. And he has a paper from the King County Court that says that he is not able to be taken into court because he's not mentally competent. He knows it. And he refers to it as his get out of jail free card. He never even gets to jail, but he knows it and he's using it. Now, he's the opposite of what you were talking about, where the folks actually see there's a way out of this addiction problem if they go down some steps. By choosing not to go down the steps and to continue the outrageous criminal behavior, he's going to find himself in a worse position. It's terrible to be around that and know that you are not helping. But that gentleman will not be helped until we have involuntary commitment, because he needs help.
I'll speak for somebody, let's say to the left, and civil liberties are important. If the person has a right, as recognized by a court case coming out of Idaho, you have a right to sleep. You have a right as a human being to be able to fall asleep. And the state or the city or the county cannot come in and remove you from where you are sleeping unless they offer you a better alternative. That was what the Ninth Circuit had determined, right, Jason? I'm getting most of the facts right on this one. Most of them. And at this point, Seattle has gone along with that as well. So somebody from the navigation team or the police officer comes up to the person laying on the street and says, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, you got to move. And the person says, well, what do you got? Well, I've got a shelter, it's not far from here. Can I bring my dog? No, you can't. Okay, well then I'm staying. Well, you're going to have to vacate this area within 72 hours. Okay, fine. And then they continue to stay. So if that's the system that is sort of in place, and if we have the idea that the civil liberties of the individual, they have a right to be there, and if they're sick and they're desperate, and we can't just put them all in jail, it seems like the Seattle political body wants to be able to extend compassion and see this individual that needs to be cared for with a bunch of services. Where does it fall apart?
I think it falls apart for one. I don't think there's honesty in the shelter space available. I lived from UGM a very long time ago. It's still, I double checked, I fact checked, and it still holds true. If you need help, if you need a bed, they're going to connect you with the services that you need. There are lots of services out there. I have no problem, generally speaking, saying you can't just remove a whole bunch of people if you honestly don't have options for the people who want them. But I think we have to separate out the folks who don't want them and the folks who do, because one side's going to be much easier to actually tackle because they want the help, and then you've got to come up with a different policy for the folks who frankly don't want it. We see what's happening in Lake City. The dude's name is Tarantula. He says he doesn't want to leave the encampment. Well, it could leave his tent. Okay, well then at that point, that's kind of on you. You've got my compassion until you literally say you have no interest, this is a choice. Then you're going to have to choose to live somewhere else. We're going to help you if you want it. I believe treatment on demand is something that actually works. And when you talk to people who actually work on the ground, they'll tell you there are beds available. I know that it's not always the best situation for an individual. I totally get that. But we have to put you in a place where you're on that path to success, and you're going to be a hell of a lot better in a shelter than living in the woods or living in a park.
Shelter is helpful as long as it's accompanied by robust case management. And so it's not just a place to flop, but getting people off the streets into a spot where they can have physiological stabilization to be able to have a meal provided for them, a safe night to sleep, clothing that's serviceable, get in the right minds, and then you begin to engage in relationship to find out what their story is, what their barriers are, their resources, and what their goals are to move them forward. And that is where change begins, is by caring for somebody's basic physiological needs, giving them dignity, giving them respect, giving them a space to get well, but they have to want to get well.
I haven't gone out. In fact, just about a little bit, a half hour from now, search and rescue will hit the streets. I think there's 3 or 4 vans. You're going to see the big love written on the side. And they stop in all the spots where they know all the homeless people will be. And they open up the back of that van, and anybody, it seems like they come out of all sorts of nooks and crannies and alleyways and everything else. They walk up to the van and they basically take what they need. And when I was standing there, the guy said, don't judge. I said, well, that guy seems like he'd do a good job. He said, no, don't judge. I'll save you a lot of trouble. Once you start judging, you start running people through filters and your own bias as to who needs it and who doesn't. Let God take care of the judging. Just offer these services to these people. They then say, if you need a place, we have 2 beds for you tonight. But I went out on 2 or 3 of these search and rescues, and you had to be clean, you had to be sober in order to get the bed. And most people rejected the beds. I think they're so addled, they're so enslaved by this drug. You say that they have to want help, but it seems to me that they can't even think straight enough to know that they need the help. How do you make that jump?
Yeah, so I don't want to take over, sir.
No.
But, you know, a lot of times what we do have a huge deficit of is detox beds. And so even if somebody is currently altered, there is ways for people to move forward.
And John,
Yes.
I have a homeless shelter at my church that takes overflow from a couple of the Catholic places. We run it with volunteers. We can only do certain things with volunteers. We can't take people who are drug addicted and booze out of their minds. I will say though, it's a great place for women who want to get off the street, and that's who we usually have. So, you know, these shelters have different ways of dealing with it, and that's why there's always beds out there.
David, I'll ask you the question. If we do not do anything at this point, what do you see happening in Seattle 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years after? If we continue with the present subsidizing, the present funding, and this idea that we have to respect that the individual has a right to be there on that street, what does Seattle look like a year from now, 5 years, or 10 years from now?
Well, I would qualify your condition a little bit by changing it to if the individual is believed to have a right to stay on the street and refuse treatment, because that's really what's at the core of this problem with the Martin v. Boise case that says that cities can't remove somebody from a public space unless they offer them shelter. So we have yet to define what constitutes reasonable shelter. So I actually see House Bill 1591 that speaks to this as being a possible step forward, because I think that this will force cities to define what constitutes reasonable shelter. And they may end up saying, well, okay, reasonable shelter is a safe, clean place to sleep, but you can't bring your dog necessarily, and you can't necessarily have a partner with you. That's reasonable to us as a small city somewhere in Eastern Washington, say. And that may get tested in court as well, but I think that's the way to go forward. So I actually welcome the passage of 1591, because it's going to force us to make some difficult decisions that we haven't really grappled with yet. So could you just quickly repeat your question?
I just want to know if we continue with the present course, what happens to businesses, to tourism? What happens and to the people that are living in the street in these conditions?
Yeah, it's all going to get worse, and it's going to get worse a lot faster if we see other communities taking the right steps and imposing some accountability. Because when they do that, I'm afraid that a lot of the homeless people in those places that don't want accountability will come to Seattle, where they'll migrate to whatever city doesn't impose accountability. And Seattle has a history of lagging behind in this area. I think that's why we're seeing so many homeless in our community now. We see cities like Boston and Salt Lake City touted as examples of the right way to do things, but I wish people would consider that maybe some of the people we're seeing on the streets of Seattle now came from those places, those success story cities, because they didn't want to go along with the program. And that leads me to my final point here, which is we need to do a thoroughgoing scientific survey of the people that are living on our streets, to see exactly how they got here and where did they come from. We can't really move forward until we do that, and nobody on the city council is proposing that yet.
Yeah.
I don't trust the survey that the city did a couple years ago. I talked to the people who did that survey, and they told me that they had recruited homeless service providers to do those head counts, and they skewed the questions in such a way as to make it look like the solution to our problem was to throw more money at these nonprofits that are providing all the services that don't work now. So I reject the city's numbers.
Hey guys, welcome back.
okay? Got it? Good. All right, so let's talk about what happened in San Francisco. They had just recently passed 10 to 1. What they're saying is, they'll come to you, they'll say to you, here is the, you must be removed from the street, we will take you and we will put you in some type of medical treatment that will be provided by the city, by the state, and this is almost forced compliance. This is the place that you will go, and the restriction they placed on it is if they have 8 times put you in a psychiatric bed, they will then have the data on you as being a viable candidate for this removed from the street and placed in treatment, even if it's against your will. Will that work in Seattle?
See if it'll work in San Francisco. I mean, it's possible. Does that work? Yes, but I'd like to look at actual data. I don't know if we're going to get any actionable data in this case because they're looking at such a small sample size. I think that every person who's out on the streets has a different background and requires a different type of intervention. Do I envision that working for the person who is literally dealing with mental illness that doesn't allow them to see the conditions that they're in to get the help that they need? Sure. Does that work for everybody? No. So I think we need a plan A, B, C, and D. We got to figure out exactly how much it costs and whether or not it's actually legal. And if there's the political willpower to get behind any plan in this city, because there are a lot of different voices saying 20 different things, and then nothing ends up getting done.
Sally, you have recently been talking to Seattle police and said, hey, listen, the people of Fremont want to be able to walk down the street, want to be able to know that they can park the car at night. Businesses want to know that they don't have to take all the merchandise out of the window. The Seattle police have been coming in, giving you more supervision. Have you noticed, because of this increased police presence, that you've moved people out, and you think they've gone somewhere else?
The truth is, little downtown Fremont is pretty clear of homelessness as far as camping and such. Mostly because the industrial area right next to us has been the place of choice. And believe me, it has not helped the industrial businesses nor Fred Meyer to be surrounded by that. But what we are doing in Fremont right now, in cooperation with the Seattle Police Department, with some political will behind it, is we are doing an emphasis patrol to try to get a handle on the shoplifting and the very high rocketing property crimes that have suddenly plagued us. And we know that property crime is getting trading stock for an open drug market that was set up behind Fred Meyer. And luckily we've just moved that out too. None of this helps anybody. But my big concern is if we, the citizens of Seattle, want these neighborhood business districts to be still there for us after a couple more years of this, we have to support them in not having this rampant theft go on. The PCC cannot take people coming in, grabbing bottles of wine, and if they're stopped, they drop them. When we do clean up the encampments, we find rotten food and things that have been taken out of Fred Meyer that still have the labels on them. None of that is really helping anybody, but it really is a detriment to our business community, and I know the folks in Seattle want these neighborhood business districts to make it. Along the Ship Canal is a very dangerous place to camp, and we have had a few folks who have gone into the water and not survived. These things don't even get written up in the newspaper. They're a little too common, and that's not helping people either. So in our case, we are trying to emphasize what the police can handle and what the courts will look at. But this is not specifically the homelessness. It is a side part of what encampment does if encampment is embroiled in the drug trade.
Bruno, you wanted to speak a little bit about to take the person and get them from the place of dependency and then have them pull apart from the dependency and then become more of a full functioning individual in society.
Right, exactly. What we need to do is empower the individual and not the institution. Take care of make sure that the individual is empowered and not the bureaucracies. And what do I mean by that? People need to understand that if they play by the rules, they get a fair shake. And that goes for everybody. Whether you be homeless or if you're the IT professional making 120 grand a year on the east side. We have to make sure that they play by the rules, they get a fair shake. And a good example of that I would say is, for instance, with the First Step Act that was passed by the President in December, it was bipartisan. It allows about, so far, 1,000 who are incarcerated to have reduced sentences. It also improved the conditions of women who are pregnant that are in prison. It also improved the conditions for women's hygiene. What does this mean? You get out of prison, you at least feel like I play by the rules, I can bounce back. Why does this kind of resonate with me? My father was incarcerated before I was even born. And I grew up in a town right beside Chicago called Cicero. It's like the Bronx of Chicago. And I grew up with convicts that were my babysitters. Okay? They were good guys. I had no bad experiences. I worked with these guys. My dad had a roofing company. And I worked with these guys. They were my buddies. And when they came out of prison, he would give them a job because he was the only one who would give them a job. Only one who would give them a job and pay them cash. They knew if you go to Ronnie, he'll take care of you. Get out of the joint, get out of Joliet, they'll take care of you. And then you work for Bruno, who's 13 years old, on a roofing site. And, these guys, I knew. So for me, this is a personal issue as well. And also had one guy who's constantly in prison, constantly a convict, and him and I were pretty much siblings. He lived with my family and I for a good part of my life. And so for me, this is personal. Like I say, you don't have to be living in a tent to be homeless, in my opinion. And so we need to make sure, wherever your situation is, you feel empowered as an individual, play by the rules. Because what's important is not just coming out of a program, but 3-4 years down the road, something's going to happen. Life happens. You're going to have an accident, you're going to get hurt. It's easy to slip back into bad behaviors. And you want them to feel like they can bounce back to something successful. The narrative I would like to see here in the near future, African American, for example, which is 1/3 of our population is homeless, and they make about half the median salary in this area. Maybe the person's homeless. He gets trained to be a welder. He gets a job in chemical on a gig, right?
Hey, right here.
Or right here. Point being is, he can be going anywhere, gets a gig, comes back, then he starts talking with maybe a retired white gentleman who says, why don't you start your own business? I can do that? Sure. Starts a business. A year later, his daughter or her niece is working for him while she goes to school. Maybe he hires somebody who gets out of prison, maybe hires a veteran. So I think it's so critical that people feel like I play by the rules, I get a fair shake, and we empower people. To me, that's the American experience, being knocked down and getting back up. To me, that's a community of goodwill, that's a community of the heart, and a community of virtue.
I want to, we're going to finish, I want to be able to get Union Gospel in one more time, because having gone there, worked there, volunteered there, and seen the work that's done, not only at Mary's Place, but also there at the shelter. Paul, who used to work with you, he's now working at another organization with mental health. And I remember the story that he told once about a woman who was at Westlake and used to see her every single day, and here she was, the police would call her, they'd be giving her a hard time, and she's just sitting there on this bench. And Paul told me that he sat with her, I think, every single week. She agreed to meet with him on Tuesdays, and then when he couldn't do it, he'd send an intern there. And then they would go by McDonald's and buy some French fries. She liked French fries. I think he said it took almost 2 years to finally find out that her story is that she has a brother who lives in Arizona. They finally got the person's name. They finally called the brother. The brother said, oh my God, we haven't seen her in 20 years. We knew she got hit in the head and we thought she died. She hadn't. She got on a bus and came to Seattle. So I said, so from the time you sat with her and ate French fries, it was a 2-year or almost 2-year endeavor to finally get the brother to meet the sister, to bring the family, to unite her, to bring her back. Government can't do that. There is no way. You talk about relationships. You can't have a relationship when you're a social worker. My ex-wife was a social worker. She had 57 clients. There's no relationship. It's going through a series of making sure you're checking in here, looking there, and making sure you're getting your drug and where else, and okay, you're done and out, next person through. How can we ever create a system where it is about relationships? Because I think that is the solution.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and an important one, because there's a fundamental difference between transaction and transformation. And as long as we are engaged with the homeless in a very transactional way, it's never actually going to get to the root causes of what brought them to be on the streets in the first place. So what we see overwhelmingly, number one, to Bruno's point, at the last snapshot, 87% of the guests that we serve, both on the men's and the women's side, have been incarcerated. And many recently where they just get dropped off and then they go down this spiral. And just like Susie mentioned, most people are trying to feed that addiction, and they steal. And so it's this cycle that gets people just spinning, where they're stealing anything they can to feed this addiction that has to be fed. But at the core of all of it is usually abuse, abandonment, and neglect. It's trauma. And so if you're at all familiar with the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experience, if you have a score of 3, it's a scale from 1 to 10, if you have a score of 3 or higher, your chances of homelessness are just multiplied many times over. The average ACE score, the guests that we serve, is 7 and higher. And so if you don't get to those core reasons and the core story of why they found drugs and alcohol a useful friend to run from unwanted thoughts, feelings, memories, if they can just numb for even 2 hours, then it's a useful tool. If you're not getting to that point in their life, then you're never going to see transformation. But when you do, when it goes beyond caring for their basic need, and it starts with a transaction a lot of times. If you're hungry, here's a sandwich. If you need a place to sleep, here's a place to sleep. But at some point, what we've found is when they start to engage in a process that gets to know them as individuals, to address their needs, and to start to engage in a system that pulls them forward from homelessness to stabilization, to addiction recovery, and then to aftercare, transitional housing, into jobs and employment that aren't just simple jobs, but they're wages that will support them and their family members, then all of a sudden you don't have a whole bunch of people, tens of thousands, in government-subsidized housing where they're still system-dependent. If you bring somebody through the right process, it actually brings them forward in life where they have dignity, respect for themselves, they're paying for their own apartment, and they're a contributing member of society, pulling then people forward that were once where they were sitting at. And so time after time after time, we've seen that in play, and I feel like we're simply trying to throw too many resources at things that don't work, and years later we're scratching our heads and saying, why is the problem getting worse?
So Terry, you're with Union Gospel, and they've been around a long time.
87 years.
Why isn't government getting the message that what you do works?
There's an easy answer to that, and there's a more complex answer. The very first thing is we are privately funded because of our faith component. And one of the reasons why we see things work, when we talk about relationship, we've got a network of hundreds of churches that actually is usually the first doorway for people to start to seek services, whether it's a food bank or a clothing bank, or maybe the church doesn't even offer that, but people believe that that church is a safe place for them to get help. That's usually the first interface, and then when it works well, that church is able to connect them into longer-term services and continue that relationship. And then they walk with them through that whole process of stabilization, addiction recovery, and transitional. So when they pop out on the other side, all of a sudden they have this built-in relational network that will then carry them forward. That scares the government. And there is this large divide where there has been absolutely no touch from a government standpoint of we don't want to have anything to do with anybody that doesn't fall in line with us ideologically. And so there has been a very stiff arm towards companies or nonprofits like ours to be able to work well. The only time that I've actually seen it work in our community has seen it work is when the city of Seattle asked us to clear out the jungle because we were the ones who already had pre-existing relationships in that space. And when the city got the courage to be able to say, we already have policy in place, we're actually going to do something to enforce it and take the ties off of the hands of our brave men and women that are officers and allow them to do their job. And then as the city stands with solid policy, and then the police come forward and say there is accountability to this, then we can come alongside relationally, and we saw numbers of people getting help and actually that have completely transformed their lives in ways that we haven't before. It's a formula that works. We've been able to do a beta test, but after that, it was a firm, and I understand not everybody's a faith. We are. I understand that's not going to be a fit for everybody, but we've seen what works. We know it works. And we would be excited to see any and all want to partner with us in that effort, because it doesn't only provide modeling that it does work, but it also provides encouragement, because that individual that you feel hopeless, that you've seen year after year on that street corner, when you see them walking across the stage, been clean and sober for 2 years, and now having their own apartment, their kids back with them, reconciled back to family that they thought was gone and lost, is one of the most beautiful things to witness, and it's what's kept me in this industry for 13 years.
Thank you, Terry. We're going to leave it at that. We've got to thank our panel as well. Panel 1, ladies and gentlemen, thanks a lot. Panel 1, panel 2 is coming up in just a bit, and then we're going to be able to save some time for people to have some comments, questions, and we're going to ask you to keep those short, to make speeches, try to ask questions, and if you have to, just force your voice to go up at the end to make it sound like a question, or then go from Canada. Okay. Panel 1 leads. I'll share with you a quick story. I did some work at Union Gospel Mission, and I went out with a guy who now runs search and rescue, and I asked him one time about the individuals we see on the street, and he said, John, they're all broken. Everybody's broken in their own way. And I said, how about you? How were you broken? And he didn't answer the question right away, but around 11 o'clock, after he got to know me a little bit, he decided to share with me this story. He said, I want you to look at every homeless person as a 7-year-old kid. Because that's what I was. I was 7. My mom had a boyfriend who came and he spent the night one night, and then he spent the night another night, and then he started to pay rent. And my mom liked the fact that he was in the house. It made her feel safe. One night, I was 7 years old, and he came into my room and did stuff to me. And in the morning, I said to my mom, hey, Mom, Jim came into my room last night and did something to me. And he says, right then and there, my mother looked at me, and she said, no, he didn't. And I said, yes, he did. And my mom said, no, he didn't. And she shook her head like this, and right there, John, I was broken. So he's 7. And then he doesn't graduate from high school, and then he goes to jail, and then he gets out, he goes back to jail again, and then he gets addicted to drugs, and then he's on the streets for 15 years down at the media store, sleeping out of that sidewalk. So he was broken at 7 and spent his entire life trying to fill that hole with drugs or relationships that weren't going to go anywhere, and he himself finally got help from Union Gospel Mission. So it's interesting, if you start to look at homeless people as 7-year-olds or 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds, as we heard from Terry earlier, that you have a traumatic experience in your life, it sets you off into such a course that you end up at the bottom. And then why I think these people are here, and why I think you're here, is the people that are on the bottom. How do we get them? How do we fill that hole? How do we let them know that they're important in everybody's life? So hopefully we get some sort of solutions here, or at least some ideas. And again, those that disagree with David, who was up here, or anybody else that's saying something, we are appreciative that you're here. We love the fact that we're going to be able to hear from you, but let's do it in a respectful manner so we can all have a conversation and learn and grow. Okay, here comes panel number 2. There we go. Wow, you guys are way down there. All right. Okay, sure, go ahead. It's nice. So we're going to do what we did before. You can lean into the microphone. You're going to be fairly close to it. Bring it close to yourself. There you go. And just introduce yourself and tell me who do you represent.
Okay, my name is Joyce Sundin, and I'm an intervention specialist. I represent myself.
Good. You represent yourself.
Chad McCann, the CEO of Fire and Vine Hospitality, and I'm also the co-chair of Third Road Coalition.
Good evening, my name is Mel Stolen, and I'm a Seattle police officer, Joe Vice President. I'm also the President of the Council of Metropolitan Police and Sheriffs. I represent King County deputies and Seattle police officers in Olympia. Pleasure to be here, and thank you for all being engaged in this topic. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mark Malosha. I am the Executive Director of the Family Policy Institute of Washington, a Christian-based social justice organization, and former 18-year legislator, state senator, and state representative.
We'll ask you the same question we started with before, it's just an open one. You ready? Homelessness in King County is. Finish that sentence.
Okay, well, I wanted to respond to that differently with a quote.
Okay.
And it was, it's by Dr. Paul Wood, who's the president of the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence, and he said, quote, "The question is, how do we get people who are dying, who do not believe they are dying, who fight the slightest inkling that they're dying, to believe that they are dying and accept help which will save their lives? This question has always lived at the center of the tragic conundrum that is alcoholic and other drug-addicted person."
Homelessness is, Jack.
I believe the visibly homeless is a threat to our business and living climate. And it's also not the current state is a cruel condition of living.
Homelessness to me, as I'm a member of this community, I've been here for 20 years and work in the community, is a major public safety issue that is not just for a small portion of people. It's impacting every one of us, regardless of your race, class, or ethnic persuasion, any way you want to carry yourself or identify yourself. But I agree with David earlier. It is solvable, but we all have to talk to one another and not shout at one another and find real solutions that are not defined by political ideology. We all need to come to one so we can enjoy our community, because it's impacted me on a personal level, and I'm not enjoying being here anymore. And it's impacting my professional life too. I don't enjoy my job anymore. I don't. I've contemplated retirement, but being here part of this panel, it shows that I'm still committed. And there is passion there, and I care about the community deeply, as you all do, because you're here. And it can be solved.
I'm going to be blunt. Homelessness is getting worse because we have leadership in our state, county, city who is corrupt and incompetent. That's number one. We have to change that. Two is we have allowed our mental health, our drug treatment, our homeless system, and our criminal justice system to fall apart, be poorly managed. Three is, despite being managed by state law, nobody has a homeless plan. Nobody has a homeless plan. We need a homeless plan. And three, we have allowed a culture of vices and incompetence and sloth to pervade our culture and our homeless programs. We need to work for a culture of virtue and success rather than enablement. And lastly, we need to make sure that we're accountable in everything we do. We have no accountability in the system. We address those issues, we will solve the homelessness problem.
So Mark, just one word, there's corruption in the system, and that's part of the problem. How are they corrupted and who's corrupt?
Well, there's a thing called a homeless industrial complex, or folks out there who know what the right thing is to do, but they're in denial, obvious denial, that their employees are being mismanaged, being hampered, being deliberately held back from solving the problem. I know these politicians and leaders. They know what needs to be done, but they refuse to admit to you publicly what needs to be done. That's a lack of integrity.
Okay,
But
why won't they?
Ideology, fear, spineless, wanting to get elected. They need to talk truth to the little powers in Seattle that's preventing them from implementing the correct programs. We had a working homeless system 10 years ago. It needed adjustment, sure it did. they allow it to deteriorate and fall apart deliberately with this new ideology where I think it's coming from the far radical left.
Joyce, let's talk about solutions. I don't think you can separate homelessness and drugs. And I remember seeing some study, they said that 40% or 26% or something, some smaller percent, were not only homeless but also had a problem with drugs. I can't imagine living in the streets and not medicating myself in some way in order to not feel that pain. Do you think that there's a direct correlation between, do you have a job, you exist in society, and then somehow you find yourself on this road to nowhere? As you get addicted to drugs, you then lose friends, lose family, lose jobs, lose home, and then you're on the street. Is that the normal course?
I don't believe that at all. I believe that the majority of people out there, I mean, I have to really give a statement that I'm not an expert on mental health, but I am an expert on chemical dependency. And what I know is that people don't start using because they find themselves hopeless. I mean, maybe there's an occasional one, but the majority are there because they have addiction. And when you have addiction, things start to erode, and you end up losing your job, losing your relationships. You end up, poor, and you can't sustain it. And so it's not that you're now using the drugs to numb out, but you've been using drugs, so that's how you got there in the first place. Okay. And I think we have to stop calling it homelessness. I think we have to address it as addiction, primarily, and I think then we're going to make some progress.
Let's say we did change the word from homeless to addiction. What do you think would then happen with the political winds?
Well, I think first of all we have to look at the whole system now. I mean, I'm not looking out there in the city. What I'm doing is I'm working with families and I do interventions. Families come to me because they're feeling powerless. They're not sure what to do with their loved one. They've tried everything. They've given money. If they need a car, they give them a car so they can get a job, and they're doing all these things. They're overperforming, and their loved one is underperforming. So they come to me and say, we've tried everything. We don't know what to do. And so my real motivation is with the family, is to talk to them about, okay, what is help and what is enabling? That in their endeavor to help, they have unwittingly become a part of the problem. And so we devise a plan, if you will, to intervene on that person, to do it in a kind, loving, respectful way, to share with them how their behaviors impacted them, and that basically drawing those boundaries. I'm going to support you getting well. I'm going to support you all the way. But I'm not going to support your illness any longer because it's hurting the rest of us. Okay, so that's what I do. But now that's a microcosm. So looking at the greater city, the city has become, not all the city, but those who are advocating for giving more and more and more money and more services to people that are not taking any responsibility is called enabling. And so the city has become the sick alcoholic family. We're talking about systems now. And so until people can start to see that providing more money or providing more services is only really in the long run hurting the person that's got the problem in the first place. So, I've got some ideas that I think are pretty great about a solution, but we're not even the solution yet. But that's what I think has to happen, is that those who are offering all these services and asking for more money to provide more services, I don't believe that that's the answer. They need treatment. They need treatment, and they need comprehensive, long-term treatment, not a going to an outpatient for a couple of hours here and a couple of hours there. I mean, people really need to be looking at going into a therapeutic community, and we have therapeutic communities that are here, that are in other parts of the country, so there are models to use. But the people that are on the street that are on meth, and when they talk about harm reduction, and I'm not an advocate of harm reduction. To me, that is you're smoking meth and you're shooting it, you're using a needle now, and that can harm you. So they now are providing
needles and syringes.
Narcan. We provide Narcan to say what?
No.
That's what we provide.
Okay.
They're
great.
pipes.
Thank you.
This is harm reduction. They're shooting it, so now they're giving them pipes so that they won't harm themselves. What they need is treatment to get off of the meth.
Then come out and offer treatment while we're out there saving lives.
Okay, this is great. You'll have a chance. You can talk to Joyce afterwards too, and I'm sure she would love to be able to do something like that.
Yeah, I'll talk to anybody about this. I mean, I've been doing this for 39 years, and I know what happens to people that get into, excuse me?
Okay.
I know what happens to people that get into recovery and how they become contributing members back to the society. But more importantly, they start to get some self-esteem. You're not going to give anybody self-esteem by giving them more services and more whatever. They need treatment. They need to get well. It's not their fault that they've gotten ill, but it is their problem. And we need to support the wellness, not the illness.
Officer, you might not be able to answer this, but here's what people, I think maybe here would say, that the politicians have tied the hands of police officers. They told them, don't engage with homeless people. Don't go up to them, don't bother them, don't move them, don't in any way tell them that they have to move on. Just look the other way.
I think if we drive around, we all can see what's happening. That's why we're here. And it is indeed true that the political willpower to enforce the current laws that are on the books to hold people accountable, regardless of their addiction. This is where I come in, is the public safety issue is existing laws that can hold people accountable. We are the public safety arm of the city. And we arrest people for crimes that are on the books. Well, those crimes are not being leveraged by the court system. And that is because of the elected officials, whether it's at the municipal level, the city attorney, or at the county level, the prosecuting attorney of King County. Those laws are not being enforced. So it's led to a retention and recruitment catastrophic issue with this city, where officers do not feel empowered, much like myself, when we see first-hand evidence of this issue, regardless of the passion, regardless of the emotion, remove it and see how it's impacting every one of us. I can tell you on a first-hand basis when I go out to these encampments based upon my current job as a full-time officer of the city of Seattle, police officer. When I'm told to go to these encampments to arrest a felonious homicide suspect, and I am not exaggerating, you can PDR my body cam footage if you want, that I can't step a square foot without seeing an orange needle cap or a needle sticking out of the ground embedded in mud, and the amount of refuse and human waste and the size of the rats is astronomical, and that's not an exaggeration. I've had to wear my body face mask, my air purifying respirator, because I could not deal with the stench, even though I was in an open air situation. It is that apoplectic, it's that real, and if we don't have the political willpower to enforce the current criminal laws, then we're in a lot of trouble, and this is only going to get worse. But I can tell you that there's a bit of a reprieve, and we'll see how long this lasts. Based upon community pushback and common sense, that since June 1st of this year, they're finally allowing the navigation team, community police team, and the bike teams to enforce two laws that are on the books. One of them deals with the Seattle Department of Transportation street use permit guidelines. So if you have an encampment, anybody that has a tent on a sidewalk that is in violation of a public area, violation of not having a street use permit, the people that have their tent set up are going to give a warning. And then they could be subject to a $500 fine, and past that, they could be arrested for obstruction. This is since June 1st that this has been allowed.
Officer, but people will say you can't arrest your way out of it. You guys just simply don't have enough jail space.
Well, I can only tell you what I bring to the table is to enforce crime. Am I a social worker to an extent? Yes. I mean, we are the brokers, if you will, to the services that we provide. The navigation team does a great job. But I tell you, they're managed by the Human Services Department in the city of Seattle, who have field coordinators that go direct the officers to these encampments or to that complaint that somebody has in the community, whether it's a private resident or whether it's a business owner. The navigation team, the CPT, or the bike team cannot just go and enforce that statute. They have to be directed by the field coordinator based upon feedback from citizens like yourself who have complained. And you can actually go on the online portal, Fix It, Find It, Fix It app that the city has. Literally, that's what I've been told. And I'm direct knowledge from the navigation team that this is how this is done. The regular patrol officer does not have that authority to enforce those laws that I just talked about. It's also managed by the city of Seattle. So that's the compassion side of it. But that's the only thing I can bring here. We can be that broker between the services that are much needed, but there also has to be that criminal accountability piece of this that is being drastically misrepresented. And we have to have the compassion and the political willpower to make sure that that is followed up. And that's not a harsh thing to say, that's a reality that is a major component to this in order to solve this problem.
Chad McKay from Third Door Coalition and also a business owner. Your father, who started El Gaucho, when he comes back to town, I know he lives over in Eastern Washington, when he comes back occasionally, what does he tell you about the business community and about what's happening near the business that he started?
I mean, I'm going to go back because we got involved with UGM because my dad was alcoholic. Spent a lot of years drinking and boozing, but for compassion, a couple of people, he would have ended in the gutter. And he always saw the people on the streets as him, but he's just a little luckier. And so our family's always had a big compassion around homeless, addiction, the ripping apart of families, of lives, and what alcohol and drugs do to you. I think he would say that Seattle and the region has a problem. And last year, that was why I got involved post-head tax. It was, all right, what are we going to do? Right? I'm tired of fighting, I'm tired of just finger pointing. And my dad taught me, if you're going to complain, you better put up solutions. And that's when I got involved on Third Door to look at what Joyce was talking about, which is addiction treatment. You can't just do outpatient for chronically homeless people. Just send them out and then put them back in the jungle. That doesn't work. So supportive housing can be one of those components, one of those places, the community of healing that can occur. I would say he fears for our city, he fears for our region, and when I look at it, I do call this a threat to our entire economy, because I am also a chair of the Hospitality Association for the state. I've been the chair for Visit Seattle. I see what visitors from all around the world are looking at when they come to Seattle, and they're like, what is going on here? You guys have all this innovation, all these smart business people, smart people who care. Why can't you pull it together? And that's why I got involved this last year. That's why I'm here tonight. It's not ideology, it's not politics. It's about how do you take a situation and have aaron conversations about solutions. So I'm a big supporter of UGM, and I'm a big supporter of supportive housing, and I'm a big supporter of treatment. And how do we drive that forward? So,
thank you. Mark, as an elected official, often the buck stops with people that are sitting at those daises at the Seattle City Council. And we have an election year coming up, and we get an opportunity to have a whole new batch of candidates. What are the possibilities that you could ever begin do you think, as someone who has run and served, that you begin to actually change the course of sort of that electric body that is pushing in a direction of funding and government compassion and less accountability for the individual, but more sort of the celebration of the person's civil liberties to be able to sort of find help on their own or to use one of the great social services that are being provided? How do you change the course of that group of people that are now having control over the $100 million budget?
Well, I've been fighting that group for 15 years, and I say it's impossible right now. You're going to really have to throw out the entire group of folks and get a bunch of elected officials who have a spine, willing to take on that homeless industrial complex. The people that you saw earlier today who want to disrupt and allow anarchy to reign, and who will address the root causes. I know most of these politicians. I hate to admit, Ed Murray came the closest to being honest when he was in power, and he gave up, and he had his difficulties. The governor declared emergency 2 years ago, and you know what the governor's doing right now. The legislature has, even though they've said it's an emergency, they've come up with 0 plans. The county, they've run away from the problem. Seattle is coming up with the 8th commission in 3 years, or 8th advisory review. So unless we have a meteorite hits here and takes out the whole group of them and we replace them, I don't see change happening.
So a meteorite.
The volcano goes off after the
I got it. Okay. We're taking a couple of questions that came up through YouTube. I think Ms. Flowers, her last name is written, she has a question. Anybody's able to answer this because people are watching this live stream. And the question from Jackie Flowers is, if there are not enough jobs or homes for people, what are we to do with that? Not enough jobs or homes, what do we do with them?
Well, I think we start off, first of all, with treatment. I think that's the doorway in.
Pay for the treatment.
Sorry?
She wants to know.
Let her talk, will you shut up?
Hang on.
It doesn't exist right now, but it does need to be designed and developed, a community, a therapeutic community, where people can go and learn skills and have vocational skills. Maybe there's, I'm getting into the solution part, but the things that they don't have now that they need, that would be a part of the community. We're not talking about a month or 2 or 28 days. We're talking about a year, maybe longer, where people learn how to mentor other people. In a therapeutic community, if there's treatment, but it's more than treatment. It's about how learning various skills for getting along with people. And what I envision, of course, is also having a cottage industry. So while they're there, they're creating things. Things are being sold. They have a bank account that's being built up. So by the time that they leave, they have money so they can get first and last month's rent and be able to have a job and be able to function in the world. Because right now, so many of them, all they know to do is to survive and on a very low level. As Mike was talking about, stealing and getting so they can get that next fix. So this is about giving them some hope, giving them some stability, but also how they're going to be able to operate when they complete treatment and are then contributing members of the community.
John, we've doubled the amount of money, treatment dollars, in the last 5 years, and it's going to double it again. It's not a money problem. The treatment system is completely broken. It doesn't work because it's been corrupted. It's a revolving door, just like the police are hampered from arresting folks and getting people into treatment. And the housing problem, Seattle is making us worse. They cost $500,000 for a government unit to be built in Seattle. That's insane.
Yeah.
It's a GMA problem. So it's incompetence and corruption of the system.
It'll be interesting to see what happens in Marysville. They have decided that they come up to the homeless individual, they say, you've got 2 choices. You can go to jail or you can go to treatment. And we'll talk about the payment for treatment. You have a chance to answer this question, because I'm sure this is going to make you want to jump out of your seat. But so Marysville comes along and says, okay, and they have the funding for it. And they think they have 25 beds or something like that. And they're going to be able to say, you're either going to jail, because that's the one choice, which I don't think you want to do, or you're going to be able to get treatment. I don't know if anybody watched the Seattle is Dying. At the end of the thing, they took you to Rhode Island. I think it was Rhode Island that had a program. And right, okay, all right, good. And in that, I think the innovation of science and medicine, I believe that we are just a couple of years away from someone finding that medicine that is not $1,500 or $12,000 a month, whatever one pill costs in order to get the person to be able to break the chains of that addiction that they have. And you would probably be able to speak to this as well, Joyce, the idea that Rhode Island says you're going to jail or you're going to get treatment. And the treatment center works on an individual basis, and it helps that person break those bonds, and then that person is free, because really they're enslaved by this. They're free, and then they are grateful that they've had this opportunity come through. That was the end of that Seattle is Home.
One little question. My house in Seattle looked into that program.
Right, yeah. Well, we would be able to ask the officer why Seattle looked into that program. I'm assuming they have. Okay, so I tell you what we do. We're going to do this. We're going to allow everybody who wants to have something to say, right? So, panel, do you guys want to hear from everybody? Great, okay. We're going to take about a 5-minute, I'll give you an 8-minute break, and everybody's going to go to the bathroom, have a chance to talk to specific people, have some questions. We'll get the microphone set up, we'll bring out the rest of the panel here, and we'll have a chance to go at everybody in a respectful manner.
John, give me 30 seconds and I can solve this.
You really can?
Yeah.